The presentation really revolves around an update on data from the KEYNOTE-001 clinical trial. So this was the original trial looking at pembrolizumab in cancer, looked at multiple histologies, mainly melanoma and non-small cell lung cancer. And what we're updating is the non-small cell lung cancer cohort. There were 550 patients who were treated as part of that cohort. 101 of them were naive to treatment for advanced non-small cell lung cancer. 449 of them had been previously treated for advanced non-small cell lung cancer. All patients received pembrolizumab, and the results had been previously reported that in the New England Journal of Medicine 2015 that there was about a 20% response rate in previously treated patients, a little bit higher in treatment-naive patients, and that the response as well as progression-free survival and overall survival correlated with PD-L1 expression, particularly with better outcomes in patients who had PD-L1 in at least half of their cells. What we update now is looking at long-term outcomes using what has typically been a benchmark in cancer research, of course, which is 5-year overall survival. The follow-up at this point is over 5 years median, and what we see is that over 15% of the patients who participate in the study remain alive more than 5 years out. And in particular, the patients who had high staining for PD-L1, that over a quarter of those patients remained alive at 5 years, although patients with 1 to 49% staining still did have a real potential for response somewhere in the mid-teens in terms of their likelihood of response, of survival at 5 years. And we also updated the toxicity. We have followed toxicity throughout on the study to ensure that we are not having problems with late, particularly immune-related toxicities, and really we saw very little additional toxicity at our analysis at 5 years compared to the analysis that we conducted at 3 years.
Thank you. And how will this data kind of change or impact clinical practice?
I think that in some ways this data is data that clinicians are aware of, that drugs like pembrolizumab have really changed the management of patients with non-small cell lung cancer. But in many respects, as the discussant at the press release we just had indicated, this does change our whole outlook on the management of non-small cell lung cancer. We typically would go in to see a patient in the hospital with a new diagnosis of metastatic non-small cell lung cancer, and we would give them a very uniformly poor likelihood of doing well, that there may be several months in terms of life expectancy and almost no likelihood of being alive 5 years out. And we do now see that we have patients who are not only alive but thriving many years after initiating pembrolizumab for advanced non-small cell lung cancer. And that, of course, is very encouraging, but does change our approach sort of throughout the treatment paradigm for patients.
And is there a potential to incorporate biomarkers in identifying the most effective patient population?
So PD-L1 is one biomarker, of course, that is clinically used, and I think actually predicted reasonably well in the previously treated cohort. Unfortunately, the 5-year survival among PD-L1 negative patients was very similar to what is seen in historical controls, whereas there were much higher likelihood of 5-year survival among patients who had high PD-L1 expression. I believe that over time we will be able to further refine biomarkers, have potentially biomarkers that would select perhaps along with PD-L1, so that we would be able to have a group that we could predict with even greater likelihood than 25% would be likely to be alive at 5 years.
And what are the next steps for this research?
So in many respects, this is probably the end of our reporting, I would assume, on the KEYNOTE-001 study. This is sort of hard for me. This is a study that we invested quite tremendously. We treated nearly 100 patients at UCLA on this study, and I continue to follow up on them. They are now, though, instead of being on this study, there's a rollover protocol. So this is probably the last time that we'll be reporting data on this cohort. I think that there clearly have been been advances in the field. Adding chemotherapy in the patients with low or negative PD-L1 expression has looked very promising. Whether we will be able to recapitulate these impressive 5-year results there, I think is something that we still do not know, but it's something that, of course, we will continue to assess.